In the book of Revelation, the fourth seal is catastrophic. A fourth of the Earth's population is killed. This poses a problem for Pre-Wrath because Pre-Wrath have decided that none of the seals are the judgment of God.
The 7 seals are not the wrath of God.
Yet, how do they get around a fourth of the population dying without their considering it to be a judgment from God? This is what we'll deal with in this video.
These seals cannot be a part of God's wrath.
We'll read Revelation chapter 6, and I'm reading verses 7 and 8. When he opened the fourth seal, I heard the voice of the fourth living creature saying, "Come and see." So I looked, and behold, a pale horse, and the name of him who sat on it was Death, and Hades followed with him. And power was given to them over a fourth of the earth, to kill with the sword, with hunger, with death, and by the beasts of the earth. As we see in this judgment, a fourth of the population of the earth dies by various means: the sword, hunger, with death, and by the beasts of the earth. But this poses a problem for Pre-Wrath because, as they say in their movie, the seals cannot be part of God's wrath.
These seals cannot be a part of God's wrath.
In order to prove this, they lean on what the martyrs in heaven say, "How long, O Lord, until you judge and avenge our blood?" And also from the terror of the wicked in the sixth seal, where they say that the wrath of the Lamb is coming upon them.
That is powerful, in my opinion.
From this, they derive that the wrath hasn't arrived up to now, and they go even beyond that. They say that no judgment of any kind has begun up to that point.
No judgment of any kind has begun at that point.
That means that the fourth seal, with a fourth of the population dying, is
no judgment of any kind.
No judgment of any kind. So the natural thing to do would be to minimize the fourth seal and to change its meaning so that it doesn't look like judgment. And we'll review the different ways in which they do this. I'll be quoting quite a bit from Alan Kirshner's book, which is a textbook for Pre-Wrath, Antichrist Before the Day of the Lord. And I'm going right to the section of the fourth seal. The first way Alan Kirshner tries to minimize the fourth seal is to ask whether a fourth of the earth is geographic or demographic. He says, "The question is whether a fourth of the earth is geographic or demographic. The fourth seal is not clear on this point." What does he mean to do by this? It's pretty clear from the text that a fourth of the population dies, but what he's saying is that perhaps it's not a fourth of the population, but actually just a quarter of the globe. That means that if Death and Hades set out to a geographic quarter of the earth and picked, for instance, North Asia, where you find the least people, then instead of a fourth of the population of the world dying, you might only have a few tens of millions dying, which would greatly minimize the fourth seal. That's the first way he tries to minimize. The second way he tries to minimize is by suggesting that Death and Hades set out to kill but will not complete their mission. He says the expression "to kill" suggests intention. And later on in these paragraphs he says, in God's sovereignty, his, that means the Antichrist's, intent to kill might be restricted. So he's clearly trying to say that perhaps the Antichrist receives permission to kill up to a fourth of the Earth's population, but he gives up somewhere along the way and doesn't use this permission till the end. And this obviously is intended to make the fourth seal less catastrophic than it is. Has such a thing ever happened? Look at Job's story. Whenever God gave Satan the permission to harm Job, was he ever lax about it? Did he not always use his permission to the fullest? Look at how God used Assyria and Babylon. Did they not use God's permission to the fullest? Look at the permission Jehu received to wipe out the house of Ahab. Did he not do it immediately and to the fullest? We find in Scripture that whenever permission is given to harm, it is used to the fullest, and sometimes even beyond that. So Kirshner's hope that the fourth seal will not be as catastrophic as it's portrayed in Scripture is vain. You cannot really hope that less than a fourth of the Earth's population will die just because it damages the Pre-Wrath model. The third thing that Alan Kirshner and Chris White and other Pre-Wrathers do is to latch on to the word wild beasts, or beasts of the earth. What he says is that when it says that among the different ways in which people are being killed in the fourth seal, when it says beasts of the earth, it should actually be the beast. He goes to great lengths to try and explain why wild beasts should be the beast. Did anyone ever translate it that way? Bible Hub is an excellent tool. If you go to any verse on Bible Hub, you will see so many translations. And how many of them have ever thought of translating wild beasts as the beast? None, not even one. He even goes as far with Greek grammar gymnastics to try and prove that the beast is using all the other means, such as the sword, famine, plagues, as means of killing. Basically, what Alan Kirshner and his pre-Roth friends are saying is that none of the Bible translation committees have the knowledge that they have about the Greek. If you want to know what the Greek says, you have to go to pre-Rothers. They possess the true knowledge and meaning of the Greek text. Let me give you my humble advice that if none of the Bible translations are saying what you want them to say, you might be on the wrong track. But why is he so desperate to translate wild beasts as the beast? That leads to the third major point I want to make, which is that they are trying to make the fourth seal look like an Antichrist's persecution of the believers. Let me remind you that it's Death and Hades who receive permission to indiscriminately kill a fourth of the Earth's population by various means. There is nothing in the fourth seal that suggests a persecution of believers. Yet he makes a multitude of statements that would hint in this direction, many of which betray his own lack of confidence in his own assertions. I'll just start by saying that throughout his book he consistently uses the term the Antichrist's Great Tribulation.
The Antichrist's Great Tribulation.
Because according to the leading pre-Roth model led by Kirshner, the fourth seal is part of the Great Tribulation.
Fourth seal is correlated to the persecution of the Antichrist's Great Tribulation.
And the Great Tribulation is only led by the Antichrist. It is also nicknamed Satan's wrath. The Great Tribulation is not really ascribed to God at all in the pre-Roth model. That's why it's important for them to make the fourth seal a persecution of believers, even though the fourth seal has nothing to do with persecution of believers. Here's some of the statements he makes. The fourth and most certainly the fifth seal represent martyrdom during the Great Tribulation. Another statement is, it is my contention that the fourth seal reflects the consequences of refusing to take Antichrist's mark. Is there proof for this? Another statement, this will be a dark time for believers. And later, the fourth seal shifts perspective from the world at large to a more limited scope, hinting that the believers only are suffering. Or, the fifth seal is likely a result of the fourth seal. Can he substantiate that? He also says, in light of these observations, I suggest that the fourth seal represents a choice people must make, Antichrist or Jesus Christ. Those who follow Christ risk death by the sword, famine, pestilence, and by wild beasts. And here is what bothers me about these statements. He says, those who follow Christ risk death by sword, famine, pestilence, and wild beasts. How does pre-Roth settle the fact that a fourth of the Earth's population is not believers? I mean, a fourth of the Earth's population would be 2.5 billion, and the true believers are perhaps a few 100 million in all the world. Well, they say Satan will persecute Christendom. That would include Catholics, Orthodox, and anything that pertains to some form of Christianity. But again, where do we have from the text of the fourth seal that Antichrist is persecuting Christendom? In all of those statements that Alan Kirshner is making, there's a point which is important for pre-Roth, which he is not stating clearly, and this I find a bit misleading. What he is not stating is that according to the leading pre-Roth model, it is only the believers who face persecution and death during the Great Tribulation. They don't come out clearly with this in the 7 Pre-Trib Problems movie either, which is based on Alan Kirshner's work. They do say that according to the pre-Roth model, the church will face the Antichrist.
The church will face the Antichrist persecution. The church will face the persecution of the Antichrist.
What they are not saying is that only the church will face the Antichrist. Let me explain. In all other models, pre-trib, mid-trib, post-trib, the question was always, does the church go through the Great Tribulation, and to what extent does the church suffer? However, one of pre-Roth's novelties and extremes is that only the church faces the Antichrist. They are not being candid about this point, and I find this a bit misleading. Had they presented to everyone that during the Great Tribulation, it's not the world at large and whichever believers happen to be upon the earth at that time who suffer from the Great Tribulation, but only the believers suffer during the Great Tribulation. If they would have presented it this way, that only the believers suffer during the Great Tribulation, would people have been subscribing to pre-wrath as easily as they do? I don't think so. Are they candid about their belief that prior to the rapture, believers are being martyred and guillotined left, right, and center, but after the rapture, there is not even one martyr? In fact, hardly anyone, if anyone, comes to faith in that period between the rapture and the end of the 70th week. Are they being candid about that? I don't think so. They're not being open about all the points that they believe in. One of the reasons they want only believers to be persecuted and dying during the fourth seal is that it's clear from Scripture that the rapture takes place in peaceful conditions. It says 2 shall be working in the field, 1 shall be taken, 1 shall be left. 2 will be working in the mill, 1 will be taken, 1 will be left. It is also written that the day of the Lord comes when people are saying peace and safety. And how can people say peace and safety when a quarter of the population has just died? Well, they try to say that it's only the believers who are being persecuted and the non-believers won't care. Believers being a fourth of the population. This, too, is a stretch. Can you imagine so many people, so many bodies around, wild beasts attacking people, pestilence, plague, but only among the believers, and everyone going about their business like nothing is happening? That is a huge stretch. And another problem with making the fourth seal a slaughter of the believers is that death is riding the horse and Hades follows after him. That would imply that the believers are going to Hades. So, in brief, there is a great problem with trying to ascribe the fourth seal to the Antichrist and make it a persecution of believers only. The fourth way in which they try to minimize the fourth seal is by calling it a precondition. Watch this.
And so these 7 seals are preconditions that need to be met before the scroll is opened.
Because the pre-wrath model doesn't want to view the seals as judgments from God, they call them preconditions. Preconditions for what? For the contents of the scroll.
The 7 seals on the outside of this proverbial scroll are not the wrath of God, but rather only the contents of the scroll, represented in the book by the trumpets and bowls, are the day of the Lord's wrath.
This is part of the artificial distinction that they are making between the Great Tribulation and the wrath of God, or between the seals on the scroll and the contents of the scroll. You know what this means? It means that the whole of the Great Tribulation is just a precondition. But what does Jeremiah say about the Great Tribulation? He says, "For that day is great so that none is like it." None is like it. What does Daniel say about the Great Tribulation? That there shall be a time of trouble, such as never was since there was a nation, even to that time. And what does Jesus say about the Great Tribulation? That there will be a Great Tribulation, such as has not been since the beginning of the world until this time, no, nor ever shall be. The Great Tribulation is the worst time ever. There is nothing worse than the Great Tribulation. And yet, the pre-wrathers demote it to just being a precondition. In fact, one of several preconditions for the real thing. Read the beginning chapters of Revelation. Everyone is waiting for the seals to be opened. John is crying, waiting for the seals to be opened. When they finally find someone who is worthy to open the seals and all the drama and the songs, then Jesus opens the preconditions. Does that make sense to you? You see how pre-wrath are trying to belittle the Great Tribulation and all the seals because they don't fit into their pre-wrath model. And as part of their trying to belittle the Great Tribulation, and I was very surprised to find this in their movie, they even go as far as saying that the Great Tribulation might last a few weeks. Listen to this.
The pre-wrath view teaches that the rapture occurs at some unknown time after the midpoint. They say that no one knows exactly when the rapture happens. It could be weeks or it could be years after the midpoint.
Listen again.
It could be weeks or it could be years after the midpoint.
You see, according to the pre-wrath model, the Great Tribulation starts in the midpoint of the 70th week and continues until the rapture. If the rapture takes place only a few weeks after the midpoint, that means the pre-wrathers are considering the possibility that the Great Tribulation might only last a few weeks. This is preposterous. And the last way for them to belittle or minimize the fourth seal, especially in their movie Seven Pre-Trib Problems, is to simply not mention the fact that a fourth of the population will die. Look at how they gloss over the fourth seal here.
Pre-wrathers point out that the events that take place during the seals are mostly things that are the direct result of the Antichrist's evil workings, not the result of God's wrath. For example, the first seal is the introduction of the Antichrist as the rider on the white horse. The second seal is about the wars that the Antichrist will fight as he gains power. Then, in the next two seals, you have famines and people being killed in large numbers, quote, with the sword.
So first they try to make it the Antichrist's evil workings when it's specifically Death and Hades who have received permission to do it. Then they lump the fourth seal together with the third seal without mentioning that a quarter of the population have died, saying that people are dying in large numbers, quote, with a sword.
Then, in the next two seals, you have famines and people being killed in large numbers, quote, with the sword.
The way they gloss over the fourth seal here, which is a catastrophic seal, is, quite frankly, dishonest. That way people are being misled by not receiving all the information and are being convinced to follow the pre-wrath model, where otherwise they might have been more reserved about subscribing to it. But the point is, why do they gloss over the fourth seal in such a way? Why do they minimize and belittle it? Because it harms their preconceived model. The fourth seal is a sore thumb for pre-wrath. I think they'd rather it wasn't in the text at all. So to try and deal with it, they resort to weird interpretations, and to gain followers, they misrepresent the facts, both of scripture and of their own pre-wrath teachings. In contrast to pre-wrath, pre-trib allows the seals to be what they are. Judgments from God, including the fourth seal, which is a heavy judgment. As Jesus opens the seals one by one, the judgments start coming. The Antichrist is part of the judgment of God on the world. The Antichrist's deceptions are also part of God's judgment on the world. If the world rejects the truth, let them receive a lie, so that they will all be judged. The Great Tribulation is not the Antichrist's Great Tribulation, it is God's Great Tribulation upon the earth. He is the one who brings it upon the world as part of his judgment and wrath. All of these things I say not as someone who is committed to pre-trib. I have no problem to move to another model if it makes more sense. I won't lose any money by moving to pre-wrath, but the pre-wrath model is simply not convincing. And so I stay, as I have been for many years, a pre-tribulationist. May the Lord bless you out of Zion.